started. So, it's my pleasure. I'm Wendy Gray. I'm the executive and curatorial assistant here at WaterFire, and the co-curator of this exhibition. And it is my pleasure to welcome these amazing and talented individuals, contributors and artists, NetWorks artists, in this exhibition for the first talk of our Artist Talk series. And the theme is world building, so you're in for a treat. I'm going to hand it off to Barnaby Evans, the founder and artistic director of WaterFire Providence, who is serving as artist and moderator tonight. So,
thank you, Emily. Thank you all for coming. It's a delight to see you. We here at WaterFire, and I'll speak for Emily and Laura and all the rest of us, this was a lot of work. It's 217 pieces made, 218 I think, 107 artists. We had previously organized the NetWorks videos because they were such a great resource that Richard had created, and Matthias Ducati and Berto and Dr. Chazan. And it's just, it's a whole world into itself. Our theme is world building here, and I think that's where this starts, is those videos just opened up an aperture to understand so many Rhode Island artists. And what WaterFire did was just put them together so they were all in one place and they had unity and you could search them. But I think we need to start by reflecting on Dr. Joseph A. Chazan, who quite unexpectedly would normally be sitting in one of those two chairs, certainly in a pink suit. He has had such an amazing impact on all of us and our community, and with none of us, I think, can fathom. And to have him here for the opening and then be no longer with us a week later was just a stunning. I can't even put a word on it. But he created a world for all of us to thrive, and I just want to dedicate this evening to that. And thank all of you for your engagement. So just quickly, we've got Richard Whitten. We're gonna go down, and I'm just gonna have introduce you. I'm gonna have each of you just say 3 or 4 sentences about yourself first, and then we're gonna come back and talk about this theme of world building. So we have right here.
Closer.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yes. I'm Richard Whitten. I'm a theater, and I actually also make some subsidiary sculpture. I'm a professor at Rhode Island College. I'm happy to be here.
And we should probably point to where his work is, but Richard's are these sort of magical pieces. I'm about 2/3 down that one.
They're the architectural pieces.
Yeah. Next up is Wendy Wahl, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm a mixed media artist who primarily works in soft materials in 2 dimensions. I have 2 examples of work here that are on this wall. They are made of encyclopedic pages on the panel. It's called Alternative Flora, and the other one is Rain.
And here is Erminio Pinque, otherwise known as part of the Big Nazo Laboratory.
Yes, I'm the director of Big Nazo Lab, performance group that mixes wearable sculpture with a lot of other mediums. I taught in the RISD film, video, and animation department, taught a course called Creature Creation for 3 decades. And I'm the illustrator of the Chazan graphic novel, which is here on this table.
And Jesse Burke is our last member of the panel.
Hi, everyone.
Jesse.
My name is Jesse Burke. I'm a photographer. I live in Barnaby, Rhode Island, on a small farm with my family, and work as a commercial photographer to support the art making process when needed. And I just want to say very quickly, and I'm sure I can speak for everyone here, that I'm so beyond grateful for Joe's presence in my life and my career. And I'm thrilled to be here to be able to give anything back to the community and even a sliver of what Joe would have wanted. So thank you for having me.
Well, I'm going to keep the same order and start. So the theme extraordinary thing is we have 107 artists here, and every piece is wildly different and intriguing, and yet you see bouncing around parallels like a cue ball, like, oh gee, that's interesting to see. And the way the show is hung, which was what Laura and Emily put together, they've added all sorts of other correspondences between one piece and another. Our theme tonight is people who do world building, and Richard, I think you are a perfect example of that. And I'd love you to, we were talking about whether this is a form of escapism, or is it a world that you wish to be part of? Is it a commentary on our world, or is it a dream?
Good. You've given me a lot of options, but I think a dream, a personal space, those are probably the closest. Thinking about this, I went back to an early experience. I'm from New York, and I don't know whether you know, the PBS station in New York used to play movies over and over and over again. Oh, sorry about that. And I'm used to just lecturing to people. And this movie was WaterFire by Joe Cotel. And it's a wonderful movie about a poet who is essentially facing a midlife crisis, but he's fascinated with death, and he finds that Hades, or death's world, is on the other side of the mirror, just any mirror. And there's this wonderful phrase when it says, "Watch death at work," because every time you look in the mirror, you see it working. And that made me, I think I've watched that movie hundreds of times. And that was such an interesting, mysterious world on the other side of the mirror. And the fact that he penetrates the mirror and goes through is an analogy for me to a painting, because a painting divides the world into the world on the other side, the world that we exist in, and the surface of the painting. And I want you to see my paintings as an object that you eventually penetrate through. And it was pointed out to me recently that the world that I create on the other side is pretty much always the same world. And that's where, what we make, I don't know quite why we do. I can tell you the influences, but what really makes me do it, I don't know. But I do want to say that it's just this wonderful place on the other side. I think that there might be something to do with the model airplanes that we were discussing earlier, because I used to fly them in spaces bigger than this, in dirigible hangars, and I found that they were just magical spaces. The planes would fly at about this speed, and they'd be up there for half an hour to an hour, and I just felt like I had lost gravity, I had lost touch with the world. I was just up there watching this thing move, and it was magical. And I wanted other people to know it, and I wanted to describe it.
And create it, actually, and share it.
Yeah, and so I've constructed it over years, and it's this thing that I just keep going back to. So it's a dream, and perhaps dreams are a personal mythology, and so it's my other world, it's my private thing, which I share with you.
That's a wonderful answer, and of course, you should watch people looking at Richard's paintings, because you can watch their hand wanting to see whether it's flat or not.
Oh yeah. You know the movie. So there is a wonderful scene where this angel, I guess you want to put it, Barnaby Evans, gives him rubber gloves, and he puts his hand through the mirror. What you don't know is that it's actually a pool of mercury. And that was how they got the special effects in 1954.
Right.
But
That's why they use the rubber glove, too.
You're right. Very heavy from what I remember. But it's just so wonderful to see that, and to think that
And there's a consistency to the world. You were talking about that, you know, after doing this for 30 years, it occurred to you that there's a similarity from one to another. And I think when you think of many people who create great worlds, their complexity reinforces itself. I mean, Erminio's the laboratory has been, it's new creatures all the time. But let me go first to Wendy, because we're going to talk to everybody here. And Wendy, these are wall pieces, but you also do these fantastical installation pieces, which are certainly worlds unto themselves. And they have layers of meaning which are somewhat occult. You know, you have to figure out what they are, but they have structure and similarity to it as well. So I'm going to use the same question. Is it escapism? Is it a dream? Is it a commentary?
I would say it's more of a commentary.
Okay.
Because it was a circuitous route to discovering that the material I wanted to use was encyclopedias. They are, in their essence, trying to create a certain world, a certain worldview, depending on the disciplines that are studying it and who the audience is. So how I got there was an event, 9/11. I was on the plane returning home safely from Los Angeles to Boston with my then almost 2-year-old daughter, and that trauma triggered a need to add a different layer to the work that I was making using paper that looked like or similar to Vespa nesting material at the time. It took a little time for that to simmer and bake until it came to fruition, but the first sculpture I did was Stand for Knowledge, and that was at the then Wheeler Gallery, now Chazan Gallery, in 2006. And so from there, I started to create large-scale installations. The second one was at the Newport Art Museum in the wonderful Wright Gallery, which is about a 20 by 30 foot space. And when I went to look at it with Nancy, I thought, wow, this is incredible. To the north, I've got a 300-year-old beech tree, and to the west, which is no longer there, to the west is still standing Redwood Library. And so to read, the piece was titled Uncovered Growth, and it invited the viewer to enter the space, take your shoes off, and walk through printed text. Because at that time, I was really noticing that the printed word was at inflection point. So the larger scale pieces invited the viewer on a physical level.
Wendy, when was the show in Newport? When was that installation in Newport Art Museum?
2007.
Okay, all right.
And then 2008, I did an installation called Arboreal Anatomy at the Fuller Craft Museum in Providence. And actually Steve Easton, who's also in this show, was having a solo show at the same time. And that's when Joe came up to me and introduced himself and said, you know, talk to me about my work, and was very enthusiastic. And 2 years later, I became a Rhode Island performance artist. So those were the larger scale pieces, and while I love doing those, they are louder and bigger. But the pieces, like the pieces that are here, are also kind of intimate worlds that I hope the viewer is drawn into. That as you move by the work seems to shift, and perhaps asking the question that maybe it's not so hard to change our perspective and perception of things.
Well, the encyclopedias are, of course, this effort to rigidly codify all knowledge in an organized, accessible basis. And then it runs into Wendy Wahl, who rips all the pages out and it completely jumbles them up and creates new meaning out of elements of meaning. So I've always liked that dichotomy in between there. But do you see the wall pieces as part of the installation pieces? Is this one world that we're seeing through two different portals?
Two different worlds. One's much more intimate, requires the viewer to kind of spend a little bit more time to find out what's going on. They may appear as topographical reliefs, but you know, with a little further investigation, you're drawn into the color, light, lightness, darkness, shape, form.
Okay. Well, it's a wonderful world to be a part of. And so what is it, an escape or a dream or an alternative place?
Well, you know, for me, the meditative quality of making the parts becomes my escape.
Right,
You know, and then the hope that others will kind of get that.
Sure.
And whether we want to escape from this world or make a change in it.
And my sense that the making of them is almost a contemplative act. Is
Very
that-
contemplative, you know, repetitive parts.
Yeah.
Over and over again, and have a lot of time to really consider what it is you're doing.
Full of peace and quiet, as opposed to Mr. Pinque here.
Or all the noise that's going on in my head anyway.
Well, Erminio, speaking of creating worlds, I've so enjoyed so many different projects. The Preacher Lab was just a revelation because we had the intersection of your talents and permission, really, and then the students just went all over the place, and it's just extraordinary. Now, my favorite story about you is you were in Providence, all packed up after graduating from RISD, and then you were going to head home, and you're still here. Well, and we're delighted you're still here.
Yeah, I got booted. I owed parking tickets, so I stayed in town, tried to figure out a way to make some money to pay them off. Street theater seemed to be the
A
only
quick deal.
non-real job that was available at the time, so the rest is an invented history.
The person in charge of the parking booths is up on the deck. You might want to talk to her later. She's the Department of Regulation. She's up there. I was just talking to her. But it struck me with that story is how such a slight little wrinkle in time and place can change a life. And you've had a huge impact on this world. And the world, the interior world you've shared with us and you bring to us is so delightful. And so there's nothing greater. I remember actually when we had the head of one of the NEA people come in, and you came in and had dinner with her, and she had no idea what was happening. It was at.
I don't think I did either.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't remember that at all. I mean,
I got a picture. But tell me where does this world come from? It's a fascinating mix of things from beyond the galaxy and very ancient theatrical pieces.
well, you know, the theme is world building, and to explore a world, sometimes you need armor or special protective equipment, or maybe just the right kind of tie or dress code or an apron. But we know that there's a lot of codification about how we present ourselves and what access we have because of the way we look. So I think at the base of all the creature costume, robot, exterior shell making that myself and my collaborators do, what we're really doing is not a voyeuristic hiding from the world or a fear response. It's about access to our truer selves, our true selves, which are sometimes released when you're, it seems like a contradiction, but that you can find and tap into your real self by losing a little bit of your external shell. So it's just basically when we suit up and enter spaces, we have a special power and permission to get into this place that might have obstacles, psychic or security obstacles. If we can delight or trick our way in and then quickly gain friendship or liaisons within the crowd, a dynamic changes. Like, this is not supposed to happen, but somehow it's okay. And if the performers feel like they're not themselves, they can tap into greater sensitivity. Even though they're wearing masks and covered up, there's a sense that's heightened, which is to identify the people you can kind of mingle with, win over, and then have them join your procession to turn the whole place into a party. So there's a million stories of how that's succeeded and sometimes backfired, but it all comes down to building a world within a world. So we build our own traveling suits to get into them.
Yeah, it's the completeness of the world that gives it reality, but your pieces in particular are about two worlds that hilariously collide. And it's the sparks that
Like
each other
those
those worlds.
two worlds of
copper butts that are
Yeah,
facing
right.
up. But, yeah, so the giant metal monkeys, which are not metal,
Yeah.
are art pieces. And yes, I was looking at them as you talked about two worlds colliding. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, you know, happenstance and theater and the absurd are wonderful things that we don't see enough of. And I love watching young kids encounter you for the first time.
Yeah, where sometimes the inner child of an older person
Yep.
for the first time kind of waking up and suddenly, you know, letting go as well.
So is it a dream? Is it escapism? Is it an alternative world in which you wish to live? Or is it commentary on our society, or is it all of them? I think it's probably all of them.
Gosh, I think every human has ever lived has imagined another world. It's just a natural thing. It's not developmentally a good thing. You know, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I think that, you know, I, like many others, imagined other realities at different stages of my life. And I think I tapped into public carnival, celebration, processional, sort of free theater, open gallery. You know, I'm thrilled to have pieces in a gallery that is this magnificent. But I also think about the people that would never go to a gallery, might not know about getting to this gallery for a while. And I'm glad to know that the monkeys have bounced in public in many different kinds of other public spaces that were not formal, you know, art presentation. But so the dream is making that happen. You know, the idea that you can kind of have a precious vision, but you can also be in the brutal world, the noisy world, the world that may not even notice you that's driving by. My roots is in street theater, as I mentioned earlier, so we were used to not having any kind of formal acknowledgement. You had to kind of earn your place. And so the lesson we've had to learn is when you go into subtle performance environments or galleries, that less is more, that sometimes quiet and solitude. So although you began to introduce me as like we're part of like the noisy arts, but we have really learned to also embrace silence, meditation, and kind of stillness as part of our performance style, which is kind of making people see us in a new way.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you, Erminio.
And I just wanted to add, Barnaby, that Joe Chazan was a huge fan of the Creature Creation show, and I was just so impressed that he could that he loved it so much,
Right.
and that sparked our connection. And to have worked on this book is to talk
Oh,
about.
we should talk about the book.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, you know, the idea of what is a book when you're a comic character in your own graphic novel, that's a different kind of shell, it's a different exterior, it's a different kind of armor to tell your story. So the book represents a similar kind of process.
Again, if people haven't read the book, it's absolutely worth diving into. I think that's the word I would use for it. So, Jesse Burke, we go from the extragalactic universe of the good professor here. I love the world that you create, this inner world of connections and intimacies and unexpected coincidences, and it weaves together into a structure that's really quite magical. So thank you for that. But let us hear about your world.
Yeah, I think what Barnaby's talking about is my most recent body of work called Wild and Precious, where I traveled around the United States with my firstborn daughter for about 5 years on road trips to get her connected to the natural world. I thought the best way to do that would be to extract her from her life and place her into the locations to physically become part of this space that I wanted her to have this reference for. And in terms of world building, I think it is definitely relevant in the sense that after the fact, and we got, when the project was sort of completed, when I would look back on the making of the work, I would realize that we were building sort of this like new space, which was sort of an uninhabited landscape that was like not post-apocalyptic, but maybe slightly desolate. We were drastically desolate. So she's really the only, and I guess what I should mention that what I'm referencing is like the book. So it's a book of this work that Joe Chazan funded and helped produce. Without Joe, the book would never exist. And the book is the ideal state for the project because it's essentially built as a rainbow from multiple tiers of arcs from the beginning to the end. So as you read the book, the first page of the book is a letter that I wrote to my daughter, sort of like reflecting on what we did, but also talking about the future. And then you go through the book and what you see is, you know, a common landscape that we would see in the desert or the Pacific Northwest or the beach, and many of the photographs were shot in New England, but she's the only figure that ever appears in the book, and she's very small, often very fragile in this like really overwhelming world that she's inhabiting. And so in one way, I feel that, again, retrospectively looking back on like, what did we do for the last 5 or so years? We created this like really beautiful, quiet place for this sort of wild, feral child to run free. And I guess like, I realized in those moments that that was the world that I wanted her to inhabit in an ideal scenario. And that wasn't the world that she was getting. So one thing that became really important was creating, and it was in the beginning of the sort of like the impetus to create the project and work with her, collaborate with her, really was to build this personal admiration, love, respect for nature and animals and the environment. And so that definitely worked because she is now about to go off to UVM to study forestry and environmental science to save the planet. And that's all I really wanted, was for her to have this physical and emotional and literal connection with the planet, and that's what happened within the project. But it's amazing because like there is many elements that go to this sort of dreamscape. And when you were asking these guys about dreams, it's really relevant in my work, in particular with Wild and Precious, because as you flip through the book, every 10 or so photographs, there's a photograph of her sleeping in the hotels that we would stay in. And it seems maybe on first glance that they're seen out of place, but the idea is that they're sort of chapter headings, and they do reference this. So the first picture you see in the book is a picture of her sleeping at the beginning of the project. The last picture you see in the book is her sleeping at the end of the project. So it is chronological. And as you go through the book, there are these sort of back and forth ideas that I want you to get about. Is this a dream? Is this reality? Are these the moments between sleeping picture 1 and sleeping picture 2? And so there is this like really interesting parallel between reality and like what I would want for her to be, you know, like the ideal state and the real state of the world. And you know, obviously not obviously, I should say, all of these photographs are sort of untreated, unphotoshopped, like actual regular photos that aren't composite or anything. So all these places exist in the world, but not exactly like you might picture them, if that makes sense. Like they're more desolate or darker or moodier or quieter than you might typically see. So they create this really sort of beautiful poetic space. And it's interesting to think about the idea of the world that I want for her, for us, for all of us, really. And using her as a vehicle to talk about that, you know. So it is very relevant. And again, the dreaming thing I think is a really big piece of that as you're looking through the projects. And the two pieces that I have here are, there's a picture of her with a butterfly net over her face, which is like a shroud in some ways, and her eyes are closed, so she sort of references dreaming or sleeping or, you know, being behind the curtain in some ways. And then the other one is a really big photograph of her holding like a wet butterfly. So there was these really beautiful overlaps that were happening unintentionally through the project. You had also mentioned with someone else about like, you know, these sort of happenstance moments that like when you call them all together, it's this really beautiful uniformity that happens in a very unexpected way. And I sort of see my job as sort of the narrator, the editor in some ways, even though like there's a lot of the photographs are staged. So for example, like they're not candid photography is what I mean. They're purposely taken, you know, composed photos. but not necessarily composed in June of 2010, and then shot in August of 2013, and then I get back 2015 and go, oh wow, those two pictures over there in the show really are family, but they were never family until this moment.
Until now,
Yeah, so there is really a literal building of worlds in that particular sense.
Just see, the feeling I got from that book was, boy, I wish I grew up this way.
I definitely get that a lot. And like one thing I wanted to say also that I think you commented on, or actually Erminio mentioned, is this idea of art in the opposite space that it's typically seen in. You mentioned something about like his art is very much able to sort of transcend the traditional boundaries of like the fine art elite, place that we sort of live in. I mean, we have to admit that as artists, as anybody coming into a space like this, a pretty high-end societal dance we're doing, right? And so one of the things that I was really taken aback by, that I didn't expect, that I love, was that this work really had a lot of play out into the non-art worlds, which I live in. A lot of my life is the sort of non-academic art gallery art world. And the places that I think it was really powerful were online venues that wouldn't necessarily deal with art or fine art projects, like People Magazine. They showed we made a film, and they were the first ones to play it online. There was a lot of interest by, I think, parents, moms, dads, nature enthusiasts, hikers, adventurers, scientists who were interested in saving the planet. This work touched all of them in a way, and which was so beautiful because, like I went to RISD for school too, and it's like a bubble, right? And like the beauty of being able to have your work extend beyond these walls in some ways is really hard to do and really powerful. So I can see, I'm picturing perfectly when you're talking about like just being in a performance in a space that's not this type of space. It's blowing people's minds, and it's opening the world in a way that's really beautiful. So that's world building too, in a way. It's like reaching
and world changing.
And truly, like that became more important to me because I feel like the average art, high-end art crowd is they're already my target audience. When you can break out beyond your audience in some ways, that's, I think, real building.
Well, I'm going to briefly address my work because I'm supposed to be talking about that too. And I think photographers are often more akin to poets in that we make new relationships and intersections. And there's very much play in your book with your daughter. It's really quite wonderful. And play earlier with the earlier structures you did. So when I think about making worlds, I think about the photographs I do here are usually, Umberto Franco, are fascinated with doing landscapes in the city of Providence. And I try to take a photograph every day and work with it, and I was trying to get away from the usual format of photography and presenting it. So there's no glass between you and the surface, there's no reflectivity in the surface. But when I think about making worlds, I think about thinking about this building when we first found it entirely boarded up, where there wasn't a speck of light in here. It was a contaminated site. And then trying to say, how could we give it a formal structure and a safe environment and still preserve the sort of cathedral-like quality here. And what we found, and I think you'll agree, is when we do shows here, we always are astonished at how well this space resonates with the artwork. Out of 20 shows we've done here, the space really is chameleon-like, and it accepts it and interacts with it. The Howard Bantre show, the Robert Rome show, and that's quite fascinating. But another world I'd like to talk about is the world that we create at WaterFire,
which is a very simple subtraction of distractions. Hopefully your phone is off, the street lights are off, and you're sitting in this space interacting with each other. And what's always astounded me is that when you enter that room, that world, people are incredibly polite to each other. You know, they'll say, "Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, can I sit here?" And that is what we are aspiring to, because we may be making worlds, but all of us, all of you, are trying to change the world. And I just think that we need something, we need art in our lives more than ever. And I got a despairing email from someone who was just looking at all the challenges in the world and just feeling they were going to overwhelm them. And I just wrote back that that's why we as artists move on. We have time for one more round of questions. Before I do that, I'd like a quick, this show started with NetWorks. And I look at those videos, let's see, and some of them were years ago. Let's see, Richard, your video. I don't know if I have the note here. Yeah, okay. Is Richard here? I think Richard Goulas has done an absolutely marvelous job with these videos, and I just want to acknowledge them. And I know when the project first started, they had a variety of different videographers, and some people clicked with their artists, and some people didn't. You know, some of the other videographers. But Richard had a wonderful, again, chameleon-like ability to listen to you, figure out what he might do to encourage you to come into your space. And do you have any thoughts about the power of that document? And is it still relevant? Has it changed? Did you learn something from it?
Yeah, I love that document. Actually, I'll start a little differently. My first connection to Dr. Chazan and actually Wendy was that she ran into me with her car. and
That's good.
Afterwards, I said, well, I guess because I got the insurance.
Yeah.
And so I said, I guess I'm not going to be in that video. But then Dr. Chazan saw the work, and I was overjoyed.
Yeah.
Being in it. And then working with Richard was really wonderful because he did very much become a Richard Whitten fan.
Right.
He understood exactly what I was doing. He was really interested in what made me click.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that his work just talked about what I was thinking,
Yeah.
what I wanted to do, what I wanted to get across to people. And I talked about the work process and the thinking process, because even though what you see is like the object, for me, it's all of the work and the intellectual sort of understanding how to put it together that is so important. He just went right through that, and it's been extremely valuable as an art object.
Of course.
In fact, I've got to show up in a museum, and it's playing 24/7 right now, and it has been for 6 months.
Yeah.
So, absolutely relevant. Sorry, can I ask you mean the NetWorks video? Yeah. It's playing. Yep, it's
Yeah.
good. It's just Richard Whitten. That is so.
We don't want Richard to get us swelled up. Yeah. No, I'm sure you got permission. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's been wonderful. What it said about me has helped me define myself.
Mm-hmm.
Just, every time somebody writes something or
Yeah.
does a video, it helps me understand what I'm doing better than I did before.
Right. And Richard's sort of a medium through which he gets you to, to come out. And that's a gift. And that's, the base of this piece was to look at this extraordinary collection of, I think there are 111 of these videos. And we tried to get every one of them in here, 13, now if we include the doctor, there are 14 are no longer with us. And there's a few people we have lost touch with, and then a few people had pieces that were just too far away that we couldn't get here because we didn't really have a budget. But we really wanted to ground it in that. Wendy, what would you say about the video process? I enjoyed the video review.
Richard was awesome. I have to just, hands down, I'm so grateful for his way, his demeanor. I remember I was installing something in the entrance to the New York City Armory, and I got a phone call, can we come video you right now? I said, can we do it next week? And he was always accommodating, and most accommodating to follow me down my road and into the woods by the water where I would walk every day, which was a basis for a lot of the work that I did. And he kept saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? It was only about a quarter mile in, but he loved the camera down there and was just, just a real champ. It really made you feel comfortable when I was very uncomfortable from the camera. So that was just an awesome experience. I also have to do a shout out to Scott Laffel for all of the still photography that he did on all of us.
Erminio, how does that video capture you and intersect with your life?
Well, it's interesting because it's definitely feels like a time before and a time after. So the video was a great encapsulation of like, I don't know, sort of a decade's worth of world building, that Richard was able to capture by, the incredible patience he used to kind of go through this archival footage that I gave him, because he did a lot of work to make sure that performance footage was in there.
Right.
And it's very dense, and it's sort of like serves me now as kind of like a yearbook of remembering where we've been and what it was. And it's a great thing to contrast where we're going now with, I kind of look at it and say, that's past, and it hints to a future that we're living now. That I look at it as a nostalgic thing. It's definitely past.
Yeah, and COVID really impacted all of us in ways that I find a disjunction in my memory going back. It's like, okay, and then there's this gap, and then it's really influenced me. Jesse, I want to go to you, but I want to leave about 10 minutes. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes here for some answers to the question.
Yeah, I can make it quick. So there's a BC before COVID and AC after COVID, right? My story with Richard is actually pretty fun, I think, too. He reached out to me and was very invested in capturing me, like doing my thing. And I had offered to him, I said, okay, I'm gonna do a photo shoot pretty soon, and I'll call you, and maybe you can just come with me and document me documenting her. And he was like, oh, that sounds perfect, blah, blah, blah. So we went up to Vermont, and this was in the winter time, and my wife found a cocoon on a branch, and I snipped the branch, and I brought it home and I put it in my office, and I thought it was an empty cocoon. Fast forward to June. I go into my office, and there's a giant moth. As a matter of fact, the story's gonna get better. I forgot. This moth, the actual moth, is in my office, and it's about this big. And it's flapping its wings, and I go, and my daughter walks in and she says, Daddy, look, and I think, oh, wow. So I put it in a container. What the hell am I gonna do? I didn't know there was a moth in there. It lays a bunch of eggs in this little plastic container, and I think, okay, gotta do a photo shoot. We're gonna release it. It's gonna die soon, actually. So we gotta do some research. It's gonna die. Okay, we gotta release it. So Richard, it's Jesse. I'm going tomorrow morning to do this shoot because this crazy giant moth just hatched in my office. You should come with me. He's like, can I bring my son? I'm like, absolutely. So we go to the Audubon Nature Center in Caraton in Seacon, Mass. And Richard just followed us, and he just basically documented me photographing Clover releasing this moth. And it was sort of wobbly at first, and it just landed on her shirt. And the photograph that I have is like cropped her eyes out, and it shows her shirt, and it's just on her, but it's very large. And then I actually got this tattoo to commemorate that entire experience. And Richard is an integral part of that experience because his son was Clover's age and they were buddying up, and I have photos of the two of them wandering, and it was such a beautiful moment for the four of us. And then the timeline of the cocoon and the tattoo. So yeah, anyway, it was awesome, and I'm very proud of that video. I thought he did a great job. I mean, I think he's a pro, and he's also a great artist. And you know, Scott is I would just add, and also an incredible artist that's getting better and better as the years go on, and no photography, you know, just like sculptural stuff. So kudos to those guys. And Joe, you know, Joe funded those guys, you know, livelihoods.
Absolutely.
100 videos with editing is a lot of money and time, and just a passion project. I don't know. There's not.
And Joe was also investing in those, on all 110 of the artists.
Absolutely.
This is an act of love. It's really
Yeah.
nice.
It's wild, selfless.
I'd love to open it up to any questions that have the audience. I'm going to bring the mic to us. Anyone want to raise their hand and say something? About Joe, about the show, about making worlds? Everybody's very quiet. People I haven't even seen in there. Well, these guys will talk about that. Yes, absolutely. Oh, let me answer that first.
Very good.
That's a good question. First of all, there's a website that has all NetWorks Rhode Island. I think she's asking that so that I can say this because I forgot to say it. And on each label, you'll see a little thing with your cell phone, and if you focus in on it, QR code, yes, thank you. She's from this century. A QR code that you can hit the button and it'll play on your phone. And once you get into it, all of the artists in the show are in there, and it's an incredible resource. It's really quite fascinating. Still, I don't see any more hands up there. Yes, Jesse?
If you take a picture of the QR code and you post that picture on your Instagram, can other people then
That's
access
good point.
it from that picture? Yes? Wow.
Yeah.
I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah.
I've never tried that.
No, that becomes a sort of permalink to your video that you can use. Play is a really important part of all of what you're doing. Play with a child, play with the world, play with objects, play with. I love the fact that you insist on making the three-dimensional object and then cast the two-dimensional object and then make it look like a three-dimensional object. It's it's process. Play. I can imagine you finding which volume you're going to shred to make another beating, and when I'm sure there's something to do. Exactly. So let's talk about play, because I think making a world, when the earliest world I can distinctly remember is sort of in the dirt and making hills and cities and getting the puddle to flow around here and creating this little world that I played with until I got in trouble. But, so let's talk about play. It's a very important part of being an artist. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever stopped playing. I think playing is the way that we learn. And I make a big difference with my students. I say, playing around is different from playing. Because playing, you sort of like figure out what works, doesn't work, and you go that direction. Playing around is sort of random loss of energy, let's put it that way. But I'm an only child. When I made those architectural spaces, I figured that I could find a way to do something in them that would entertain me. I've never been bored. Or else I bore easily, or I can say that I've never been bored. But, and eventually, this work doesn't show it, but I do make these machines, these imaginary machines that live in the architectural works that I make now. That is a change from the video. And there are objects that I hope the viewer can sort of play with and like touch and make go into motion to make the painting alive. And even though I don't put people in, don't put anything animate in, I want the painting to become animate. And that's the way that I'm making
Sure, of course.
You've used the word escapism. Of course, that's a tough word to attach to yourself. And I do think many of us as artists escape into our studios. That is like our sacred place. And so there is a validness to escapism.
Yeah, escapism is a pejorative term, but it's also a sanctuary. It's a source of truth. It's a place of reflection.
And the dream aspect, the reason why I picked on dream is as a precocious child, I started reading young in 8th grade. And when I went to grad school, I had the opportunity to, through the school's insurance, to have a Jungian analysis, do dream analysis with me. And actually a lot of what I learned is still affecting what I put into the paintings. So that the dream, the play, that all fits together. And what is personal and quiet is just as loud as something.
Sometimes not. Wendy, play in your work.
Play. Well, I'd like to hope that I remain a child at heart for my entire life, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job of it. The play piece of those installations was just so much fun to not be the artist watching, but to just watch other people engage in the space and hide behind the trees and dive into the pages, not even knowing why I was deconstructing and reconstructing encyclopedias. So that piece was unimportant to anyone. I think, at least to the younger people, maybe to the adults in the room, that they got that part. I think that the work that would still work, what I call the two-dimensional relief pieces that are not playful in their appearance. But there's something that I'm doing now that has run alongside of this paperwork for the last 14 years. It's a project that I call myceliology, which is a combination of the two words mycology and mycelium. And I began foraging and playing with mushrooms and actually drawing with the mushroom spores, and they were inviting me to draw with them. So that playfulness of being out, most of us I think in this space, on this panel are really interested in nature and our place in it. Now that we know, or it's becoming more evident how important that fungal kingdom is to our existence, just very playful.
There's playfulness and playing is part of any performer's regimen. But there's also, I want to address the playfulness and the play that takes place in creating the pieces. Most of the folks that I work with and train, and even my own discipline, is to let go of preconceived ideas, because as soon as you begin to work to make something that you have in your mind, it's a totally valid way to work, but it does introduce you to your limitations very quickly, and that can be followed by frustration of not achieving your goal. So when you playfully just start putting together materials and work with tools in an uncomfortable way, in a new way, using your left hand instead of your right or whatever, you start to create these accidents. And if your attitude is one of improvisation or playfulness, you can actually discover new stuff that, wakes you up and makes you say, this is the way to go. And it's funny to think that with all our training, contemplation, and willfulness, sometimes the completely most nonsensical action you take discovers and initiates the big leap forward. So that's play is so important in that way.
Absolutely. And for the audience as well.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, the last couple of things you said really strike me as my experience. And I can tell another little tiny story. So when I started, I think what you just said about like all of our training and regimen and all that stuff is like how we enter the world, right? And then we just use those tools to create our art. And one of the biggest game changers for me was the first time that all of that fell apart. I was standing on the coast of the beach in Maine. We had driven up Maine all the way to Canada. And it was the end of the day, and we were on this beautiful coastline. And I really wanted to just take a photograph of Clover standing and looking at the ocean. The fog was beautiful. And she had been in the car with me for like 5 or 6 hours, and she was like very rambunctious. And there was a lot of commercial fishing debris on the beach because it was like really remote, you know. And she just wanted to run around and play in the rocks. It was a rocky beach, not sandy. And there were ropes and fishing line and all kinds of stuff. And she found this really long rope, and she wouldn't listen to me. You know, my previous project, I was working with adults and directing them, and they would do exactly what I said, take a picture. And so this is the first time, this was in the beginning, this is the very first road trip we ever took before I knew what I was doing, right? So this was a really instrumental piece. And so she's sort of wrapping the rope and spinning in a circle, and I was getting really angry. It was the end of the day, I was exhausted, we were both exhausted and hungry, and I was yelling at her on the beach, like, please, you're ruining this moment. I need you to do what I want. And she was spinning in the rope, and it was wrapped up, and I was like, that's it, we're done, we're leaving, I gotta go home, I can't deal with this anymore. You know, I wasn't out there to photograph her, I was out there to photograph the landscape, but she just came along for the ride.
Yep.
I got back to the hotel, and I'm flipping through the pictures, and I had an epiphany, like truly, one of the most incredible epiphanies of my life. That the best picture was the one where she was doing what she wanted.
Yeah.
And I had to really like check myself, and I realized in that moment that it was a collaboration. The project wasn't about me getting her to do what I wanted as much as I thought it was. It was a little bit.
Yeah.
Still the dad, still the safe one, still the provider and all that, but I learned in that moment that I needed to like stop, relax, and just let her be.
Right.
And that was the way the collaboration was going to work, and she wanted to play and run around. And it took me a long time to accept that, stomach it, but that one I'll never forget, sitting in that like, kind of like shitty motel up in the way up in Lubeck, Maine, and thinking, oh my God, this is not about me. This is about her. And I need her to be herself. So when I tell her what I want her to do,
Well, and the gift
she's
of
just an
being
actor.
yourself.
Yeah, and after that, it was done. It changed everything. I mean, this photo of her with the net on her face is all her, then I started to just like direct her, but also follow her and let her lead. And, I think it had a huge impact on the work and my life. Now I'm a dad of 3 daughters, and I realized the power of, letting them be is a delicate balance when you're trying to take pictures. And anyway.
Jesse, thank you for sharing that. That was a
Thank
wonderful
you
story.
for listening.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, and I just, as usual, you met Joe Chasen by slamming your car into him, or maybe vice versa. Vice versa, okay. I wasn't quite sure. Wendy, I'm a mushroom nut. My first job in Rhode Island was to work for the Mycological Herbarium at Brown University for Dr. Snell, and did spore prints and all that sort of stuff. Erminio, I'm going to give a tip to the parking person who's up here who does the boot program, because you were a gift to us. And Jesse, now I have this vision of you watching in horror as there was this wonderful story of your daughter having fun wrapping herself up in the kelp. So this has been a wonderful insight into your work. It's an homage to Richard's genius in bringing us together, but primarily it's a huge thank you for Dr. Chasen for the world he brought us all together within. So thank you very much. Thank you all for all of you.